Okay. Group 4, please.
Hello, sir. Hi, friends. We'll discuss about the corporate strategy of Tata's, considering into fact that allocation of resources and identification of opportunities form an integral part of the strategy. From the case, as many have specified also, Tata is one of the biggest and most respected Indian business houses. It has a high brand value, which will always remain its sustainable competitive advantage. Like all other major companies, it began its existence by serving just one or few niche markets. Like in this case, it started with the textile industry. But Jamsetji Tata had a bigger dream. He wanted to bring in latest industrial and intellectual conditions in the country. He expanded the scope of operations to include activities like steel, hydroelectric, hotels, technical education, research under the house. It also expanded into engineering, chemicals, cements, and so on. The company had become a conglomerate by making unrelated diversifications, such as I specified, steel, hotels, power generation, publishing books, making watches, providing services, and so on. Eventually, we saw that from these unrelated diversifications, the company went into related diversifications, like from power generation to power distribution, from the telecom equipment manufacturing to telecom service providing, from heavy commercial vehicles to lightweight commercial vehicles, say from Tata Steel to tin plates, refractory, special steels. Now, the company also used vertical integration as a mode for expansion. The Tatas, as specified in the case, were famous for their management styles that they tended to enter capital-intensive, vertically integrated business through joint ventures, foreign licensing agreements, and so on. Voltas is another case in which it was traditionally into retail and distribution, but because of retaliation, it had to go into manufacturing and engineering operations later on. But there are certain problems related to vertical integration, which are balancing capacities and throughput throughout the supply chain, which is very difficult to maintain. There were obviously some of the reasons which prompted Tata to go into diversification, and we will discuss some of those. Before the independence era, India had, as we all know, little exposure to manufacturing companies. The industrial conditions were not very good, and hence Jamsetji Tata had the dream of improving the industrial and intellectual condition of India. After independence, the regulations became increasingly difficult for the foreign companies, which again became a reason for fresh wave of diversifications for the Tatas. As we saw, the Tatas increasing shareholding of Forbes group of lead industries. But ironically, the government, much influenced by the Soviet economy model, took over certain companies of Tatas, and in fact it attacked other private businesses as well. As we saw, Tata Airlines was taken over and was renamed as Indian Airlines. Tata Insurance, as specified, was nationalized in 2 phases.
Air India, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. Tata Steel, under the license Raj, was not allowed to expand because there were other government steel plants running at the same time. Hence, the company, the Tata Group, had very little options than to look for other avenues for growth under the restrictive policies of the government in the 1970s. Moreover, there were certain other sectors like watches, Tata Unisys, telecom, where the company saw immense potential for growth. TCS was also one of those, and as we now see, it is one of the most profit-making companies of Tata's. And it also introduced Tata's to access to resources like technology. The company initially was formulated so as to help the other business-related activities of Tata's. But as we see, there were costs to diversification. and it did not come free. The Tatas stumbled in industries where investment was not intensive, but competition was intense, such as the textile and consumer products, which is specified in the case. This was the cost of neglect, which I would see the company paid. The company filed for liquidation of one of the textile companies and closed operations of the other textile companies. Tata Oil, a consumer product, Nelco, electronics consumer company, these both faltered in the market. The companies had several problems, not particularly related to diversification, in the earlier 90s. And the data that I provide here is as of 1991, unless and otherwise specified. The company was overstaffed, as is clearly mentioned. Employees had no fear of punishment. Absenteeism was very high. The senior management still had a very tolerant attitude. As Mr. J.R.D. Tata himself said, we can't have this in Tatas, when they talked of removing some of the employees. The company again recruited some of the employees on the basis of emotional bonding rather than performance. As we see that there were third or fourth generation employees in the Tatas. Hence, company had survivors rather than performers. As again specified, businesses were run like charities and were considered a matter of pride rather than as profit-oriented enterprises. Unfortunately, at a higher level in the hierarchy, the turnover of directors was also very slow, which caused large amount of frustration within the company. But nevertheless, the company remained the largest and the highly respected conglomerate. It still enjoyed a very high brand value. It was known for ethics. It had a skilled professional management. And if we consider the opportunities, they were immense. They wanted to grow into the area of telecom, which we now see generates most revenues for Tatas. They wanted to go into information technology, and we see TCS again is a wide known example. They wanted to go into automobiles. They wanted to form strategic alliances through mergers or acquisitions. Again, in 1991, the company had a clear mission under the guidance of Ratan Tata. The company wanted to selectively enter and manage technology-related businesses. It wanted to act as organizational catalyst for inducting new technology-based activities. It wanted to supplement, support, and protect Tata shareholding in the group companies, which we also now see that Tata Group has increased its shareholdings in much of its companies. That's all I had to present. Thank you very much.
Good. Good presentation. Questions? Huh? Everyone is zapped. No questions. Yes, Amar?
Well, you just mentioned at the end that they went into strategic alliances through mergers and acquisitions.
As of 1991, they had...
I have a problem in the terms used.
Okay.
What do you understand by what you think about strategic alliance and mergers and acquisitions?
Strategic alliance means, well, if you go to the literal definition of the term, alliance is different from merging. So, and acquisition is acquiring smaller companies.
So
like
completely different. So, alliance is a strategy, acquisition is a strategy, merger is a strategy.
Right.
So, it's not strategic alliance through mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, it's not strategic alliance through mergers. Agreed.
All right. Any other questions? All right. If there are no further questions, yes?
I have a question, somehow not related to this presentation. While
Unrelated,
they had
diversification.
different organization structure. While one company, Tata Steel, had a departmental organization, Voltas was a matrix organization, and so on. So, and they tried to have best practices conform to the Tata philosophy. how can an organization develop a culture having different organizational structure? Is it possible to have conformity in the philosophy?
They did not have a common organizational structure, and it is also specified in the case they had a common philosophy. So all companies were led by philosophy of maintaining the ethical values and hence looking out for opportunities which would result in maximum profitization. So every company could have a different mode of expression.
But the structure was different in different companies. Why? Everyone knows the answer, one at a time. Nature of the industry, all right? So obviously TCS can't have the same kind of structure that Tata Steel will have, right? Without laboring the point, everyone knows that. But important point is, what was the bonding force? It was cultural, basically, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So in organization, you see here, it's a case where you're talking about house. So it's diffused. There was a phase, you know, when GRD stepped down, when it had become too diffused. And what was the challenge before Ratan Tata then? To bring it back again, is it not? It had become so diffused that there was a distinct possibility, the market was looking whether the house of Tatas will disintegrate, the house. But later it didn't happen. Huh? Who won the battle? Ratan Tata won the battle. I think his senior colleagues underestimated him. How did he win the battle? We'll discuss right at the end, after this. Presentations are all over, okay? When you make a good presentation, I think you know you have made a good presentation, right? So he was being congratulated by everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think this case, the House of Tatas, is a very classic and a very good case about how, with changing times, companies have to go for rethinking their strategies, refocusing what they are doing and what they have been doing all along. And this can be done in spite of the fact that they maintain a common culture, they maintain a common philosophy behind whatever is happening in the front. So we have decided, divided this presentation in three parts. We have analyzed kind of what Tatas have done before the independence, post-independence till 91, and from 91 up to this point. So if you go to the pre-independence situation, we would see that normally if you look at corporate strategy, any business, more often than not would try to diversify into a field wherein it has where it feels that its present competencies are allowing it a clear advantage over others. Now, that is exactly what Tatas didn't do at that time. They were pioneers in textiles, steel, insurance, airlines, and all unrelated businesses. So the primary reason for that was, as already Professor mentioned earlier, was Jamshedji's vision. Now, that vision which he had for the country, as Mr. Amar also said, was very finely tuned with what he had, the vision for his company as such. So he wanted a politically free and economically strong India, and at the same time, because of this basically, he wanted his company to go into core industries, infrastructure and all, and develop India that way. Now there was one major point also here, that profit making was considered a secondary task, it was not a primary task. So then there was also a factor of the board being primarily Parsi, because what was happening, it had its advantages. For example, you had a backing of a very wealthy and an educated society, but at the same time they were not very demanding as shareholders. So the motivation to actually earn for the shareholders was exactly not there. So this also helped Tatas go into areas where they probably didn't have that kind of an expertise. Now if you look at the post-independence scenario, first of all we'll look at what Tatas, they had a neutral stance, were not actually leaning towards any organization, and at the same time the government regulations were becoming harsher with each day, and even some of the Tata companies were nationalized, like Tata Airlines and New India Assurance. But at the same time, the less competition was allowing Tatas to flourish. Now, all along, the focus had not changed. That was very important. They were still going into core industries. For example, they diversified into Tata Chemicals, and then they had a collaboration with Daimler-Benz. Now, again, but what held them in good hands at that point of time was that they were always all along in philanthropic activities. So possibility of getting into conflict with the government was very less. They had started TIFR and Cancer Research Institutes and so on. Now, if you look at 65 to 80, this period saw regulations getting harsher with each day, as I already mentioned. Now, this prompted the Tatas for the first time to take some kind of a proactive stance, which was very unlike what Tatas were doing. Because they were part of an industrial embassy, which was set up in New Delhi, which was manned by civil servants and military officers, retired civil servants and military officers, and this was some way of lobbying with the government, because it was getting very difficult to operate in a very controlled economy. Now, but in 1978 there was a very strong bid to nationalize Tata Steel, and it barely failed. And then at that point of time, Tatas went into a shell. They just decided the strategy at the time was that, okay, let's consolidate what we have right now. They stopped investing in any other high investment projects and all, and there was a strategic shift because of the regulations in their focus. Now they started investing in the services sector more. Now, in between, there was one of the most important decisions that Tatas took in 1969, and that was the formation of TAS. Now, TAS was formed, and it helped them in two ways. First, obviously, was it provided them with quality management personnel, and secondly, the synergy between the group could be maintained very well because of that.
Excellent point, not yet mentioned by anyone.
Now, this is now the part of the corporate strategy was maintaining very good HR practices in the company. Because if you look at it, HR is one field where it's very difficult for your competitors to imitate you or copy you, because if you have the loyalty and the faith of your employees, it is very difficult for the competitors to actually do that. But at the same time, they were floundering in some businesses. Textiles were doing badly. The feeling was that the group was carrying deadwood all along, and there was very low market orientation. It was not a very good marketing company as such, and the leadership was aging. Now, a very turning point in Tata's at that point of time was 81, when Ratan Tata became chairman of Tata Industries, and he tried to infuse new ideas into the organization. Although his 1983 strategic plan was rejected at the very outset by the board, but at least it led the group to think in new ways. For example, he said he was for technology-driven leaderships, select product market segmentation. In fact, this point is what the Tatas are pursuing now. He had actually envisaged this kind of strategy in 1983. Joint sector projects, acquisitions, mergers, and probably divesting certain businesses like oils and etc. And moreover, he wanted synergy between the different Tata companies to be very high. Now, in 1980s again, Tata started expanding, but all along Jamshedji's philosophy of not taking very hard decisions as far as taking care of your sick businesses or closing them down, because of that Tata philosophy was all along there. That's how ACC that's how Birla's taking initiative from ACC, arresting the initiative from ACC basically, when the government eased regulations in cement sector in 1982. And then they were very late with when government actually eased regulations in the passenger car sector. Nelco, Voltas, they also were kind of floundering. Now, there was also a problem which was occurring in those days, was the centrifugal tendencies in the group, that the groups were becoming, each of the Tata companies, few companies within the Tata group, under the leadership of some powerful leaders like Darbari Seth and Rashid Modi, were getting powerful with each passing day. These leaders were getting powerful, in fact, and they were trying to, they were increasingly getting very different from the way Tatas were doing business. So that was the problem there. Then also the image took a beating somewhere during that time, because some CEO of a company was held for offering bribe. There was a suicide by another person after a tax raid and all. So there was immediate need for corporate restructuring. 1991, with the now we go into the last phase, that's 1991 up till now. In 1991, with the liberalization and privatization of the economy, Ratan Tata again came to the scene, and he gave his new strategic plan for Tata Industries. And the strategy was to facilitate diversification of group companies, synergy. Again, he focused on that. And the focus was on technology-based industries, where he thought the future was, and that is, we see Tatas in telecom and all. That was because of that focus. Now, and also, as part of the synergy thing, he wanted to the Tatas to emerge as a complete solutions company, wherein they could use the internal resources very well to undertake turnkey projects within the industry. Now, if you look at the situation in 1991, the group was not seen as very aggressive. So the strategic plan, which he had put up in 1991, that threw up certain transformation agenda, and that was consolidation, renew purpose, promote brand, improve governance, and focus the portfolio. In fact, if you look at consolidation, they have spent around about 2,700 crores from 1991 up till now to increase the Tata Sons holding in the group companies. The Tata holdings, the Tata Sons had holding of around hardly few percentage in these companies. Let's say Tata Electric, Tata Power, and all, and it has skyrocketed over these years. And in all the major companies, they have more than 26% stake right now. This was his way of restructuring the whole thing to increase the power of Tata Sons within the business. Now, Roshi Modi, and in this process, Roshi Modi and Darbari Seth and leaders of those sort were eased out, and so the group now started to work in more or less cohesive manner. Now, if you look at they were into 7 or 8 major business areas at that time, and he wanted the portfolio to be more focused, and this refocus that led Ratan Tata to go into telecom and passenger car Indica, for example, and ultimately now they are focusing very, very aggressively on the top 12 Tata companies. Now, there was one more factor. All along, Tatas were perceived as a company which was not very market oriented. For example, even in Tata Tea, they were there, but it was primarily seen as a company which was vertically integrated in this factor, in this industry, but it was not exactly deriving its value down the chain. That means in marketing and all. So Ratan Tata not only had ambitions of getting the company, developing the company as a marketing powerhouse in India, but he had global ambitions for Tata Tea, and that led him to buy Tetley and focus Tata Tea on a world stage. Now, at this point, you might say that he divested Lakme at the point of time. Both are consumer goods. Now, one would say that why did he divest one and at the same time acquired in another? Because if you look at it, Tata Tea is not exactly a core business. But the thing is that the philosophy has been now, or at least now, is that they want to concentrate only on those areas wherein they are number 1, number 2, or number 3 in the industry. Any company which is not within the first 3 in industry, they don't want to actually hold on to that company anymore. And that was the reason why Lakme was sold to Unilever, and they got a very good price for that. Now, the kind of synergies that they have developed within the group they're helping them into getting the level of collaboration which probably no business house in India can get right now. Because, for example, if you look at automotive engineering sector of Tata's, TCS, the Tata Autocom Systems Limited, TACO, Telco Automation, Tata Engineering, all these companies collaborate on single turnkey project, whichever comes in the automotive sector to the Tatas. Now, if you can, for example, and if you look at TCS, it has worked with all major automakers in the world: GM, Ford, Bajaj, Mahindra and Mahindra. TACO has worked with Daimler, Chrysler, Ford, GM, Toyota. In fact, there's a very interesting case here. Toyota India subsidiary gave TACO the project of designing the outer panel of Toyota Qualis. Why it is interesting is because TACO did the design, but it gave the production work to Tata Engineering. Tata Engineering produces Sumo, which is a direct competitor of Toyota Qualis in India. Now, what is happening here is that the reputation that Tata as a group are now developing in the market today, even their competitors are coming to them with their projects, because they know that the group can deliver the best in any field, in this field, at least in the automotive field. And then now, if you look at it, the Tatas from a company which was very reactive, and to say the best, it was very reactive. It was not even reactive in the pre-independence and immediately after independence. It used to take a lot of time in making decisions. It has developed into a company where it has always maintaining an eye on the future. For example, the future initiatives of the Tata management are to develop younger top management, compensation to attract the best in the industry leadership, globally competitive, and moreover, they want to focus on certain segments and go very aggressively on that. They want to expand not only through they want to expand through acquisitions and divestiture, and they want to expand through acquisitions and through related diversifications. At the same time, they want to get out of businesses they are not good at, they feel they are not good at. Now, if you look at one thing I actually forgot to mention was the kind of synergy which is between the Tata groups right now is more of strategic alliance. It is not a merger, they are not merged, they are not unified in any other way than actually going for strategic alliances, taking up projects together, bidding for projects aggressively. So that's helping the growth. Now, there's one more thing, very important thing, that is the WTO thing, because by 2005, we'll be facing increased competition in that. And this Tata actually had the foresight in 1999 only to form a WTO cell in their group, and moreover a Department of Economics and Statistics in Tata Services. What these people have done is that they, right from 1999 to this point, they have trained about 5,000 professionals whom they called WTO evangelists. These people are going to see that how they can harmonize Tatas into the new world post 2500, so that the effects of WTO are not very adverse on the company. Thank you.
Very good. Any questions? No questions. Everyone is stunned. All right. No more questions. Huh? Either stunned or they are tired. Come, last but not least. Really good, no?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening to everybody here.
See, it will be a better one now, I hope.
What we'll be discussing is basically the corporate strategy in theoretical terms. What are the pluses and minuses of the corporate strategy that the Tatas have followed till now? If you look at the group broadly, they have followed unrelated diversification. This sees that they go from textiles to steel to hotels to power. So we can call the Tata Group as a conglomerate. But one basic difference in this form of unrelated diversification which they've gone in for is normally unrelated diversification people go for by the form of acquisitions. But this is one company that has grown primarily by internal development. But also there's another reason for this, because at the time they were there in these industries, there was nobody else for them to acquire. That's probably why they chose the role of internal development. And plus, the vision of the founders are, they didn't go into companies or they didn't diversify into businesses to make money. The group diversified into industries with a view, quote, to improve the industrial and intellectual condition of people of this country, end quote. Hence the diversification into steel, power, research, which were essential to India's modernization at that point of time. In fact, if you look at his diversification into the hotel business, it was also more a matter of pride more than anything else. There's this fact in the case where he was hurt when he was not allowed entry into a hotel, and he came back and set up the Taj Mahal Hotel. Let's look at the benefits of this strategy which they followed. One thing is they get more attractive terrain, in that they get faster growth. Entry into high growth areas gives them the advantage and potentially new sources of technology and skills. In time, these resources can become the basis for future industries. Classic example of this is TCS, which probably in the next 5 years will probably become the Tata Group's biggest company in terms of profits and revenues. Profitability, new terrain, less competition, so therefore higher rate of return, and you get more breathing room. But in their case, at least in the early times, they weren't there for profit making. Stability, if they are in several businesses which have different operating cycles, if you look at the overall performance of the growth as a whole, one bad cycle will probably even out one good cycle. Then they get access to resources. By acquiring scarce resources, a company can improve its own competitive advantage. Technologies, diversification is an important way for firms to learn, to extend and acquire new businesses. Again, example of this being TCS. Then expertise. Expertise possessed by a business represents a free and invaluable source for another business to access. This example of this is TAS. TAS has been formed mainly so that the group's vision and the group's philosophy is spread across all group companies. And this can be accessed, this allows free movement between companies. In sharing of activities, allows sharing of one or more value chain activities amongst businesses. And an example of that is the network from HCV to the network of distribution was used from HCV and to market their LCV products as well. I think coming to the disadvantages, the success of this strategy primarily depends on how you beat the market. The person who is deciding on which industry to go in. Now, you are depending upon the ability of that person to foresee the market and where there are growth opportunities. And there's something called a conglomerate discount, where the sum of each individual company becomes greater than the whole combined. You've had instances of this, as has been mentioned by several of my friends, about Darbari Seth and Rasi Modi becoming incredibly powerful within their companies. And there's a quote by Rasi Modi when he says, "It would be legitimate if the companies decide to go separate ways." So it's not that the Tatas have been entirely insulated from this problem. There are instances given in the case where they've had this problem. Then coming to the costs of diversification, costs of ignorance, neglect and cooperation. I think neglect, the textile business suffered once they started diversification, and they eventually had to sell it off. Then cost of cooperation, you found that actually companies were in fact competing with each other for the same resources. Question is, how do you limit diversification costs? And it's interesting that accidentally or intentionally the strategy that they have pursued has cancelled out the costs of ignorance and the cost of diversification. When you enter new areas internally rather than by acquisition, it helps you overcome the cost of ignorance. I think the logic behind this approach, behind this explanation, is that once you internally develop a business, you tend to learn a lot more about the business than if you were to say buy it direct, just because it's a high growth business. Then it's also most likely to occur when new businesses enter crises. But if you see, most of the business which they entered, they didn't into crises immediately. The crises which you have are much later down the line when they started the businesses. And cost of cooperation, one way to overcome it is businesses must cooperate with each other such that costs can be minimized by careful design of administrative systems. And the Tatas have done this to a great extent with the TAS. Then another interesting point is the complete change of outlook of the group after Ratan Tata takes over. You have earlier case where they are more socially oriented, in the sense that profit is not necessarily the entire and is not the only motive, and they're not very aggressive. But the minute once Ratan Tata enters the picture, you see a clear shift in the outlook of the Tata group. Profit suddenly does not become a dirty word, and more importantly, he's increasingly seen as being very aggressive. And if you look at the combination of his 1983 and 1991 strategic plans, it says adopt the roles of acquisitions, mergers and divestitures. You've seen this with them buying over VSNL, they're entering into a merger with Batata, and sold off Lakme and ACC. Then you adopt a technology-oriented policy for growth and survival. Leadership position over 3 to 5 years in new businesses. In fact, Amit mentioned the point that they would be selling off businesses in which they are not either number 1, number 2 or number 3. And increasing holding in Tata companies. This perhaps presents the biggest shift in the policy of the Tata group. Whereas earlier they were only holding very small percentages. But point is why, that's probably the major point of why suddenly increase holdings. What our group has suggested is, one thing is, Amit already mentioned, to consolidate his position in the Tata group, because the group was in serious danger of being broken up by other power players who were getting increasingly powerful and were also very popular in their companies. But probably, and also another thing is, it shows that Ratan Tata is not afraid of making money for himself. For himself, I mean the Tata group. Whereas in the earlier cases, it's all going to charities. I think a Ratan Tata strategy, what it says is, I'm not in business for charity. I think that's what it says. Ratan Tata is clear, there's a clear shift in his strategy. And that's all. Okay.
Thank you. Yes. Good. That was good.
Being lower in case when a company goes for diversification on its own rather than go for an acquisition.
Yep.
I have a slight doubt on this, because I feel that when you acquire a company, an established company, that company has already prior knowledge of operating in that particular industry, so you should gain from that knowledge.
But will you necessarily gain? First thing, you'll be spending a lot of money in acquire. See, there are 4 different ways when you can acquire a business. You can acquire a business that's doing very well and then take it over. You can acquire a business that's doing very poorly and take it over. And there are 2 other which I don't remember exactly. But when you acquire a business that's already doing well, question is, will you keep that existing manpower that is there, or will you, when you acquire a business, you want to take over? So I presume that you will now shift that business into your way of doing business. Question is now, do you still have that kind of capability?
So it's basically up to the strategy of managing how you go about that acquisition.
Yes. Yes.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much. Well, I think this is a beautiful case for discussing strategy. Now, what they did right and what they do wrong is not the point to be made in a class discussion of a case. But this is a case which is beautiful because strategy, we started by saying what is strategy, and the key word there is long term, is it not, as against tactics. So this is a very long time. It starts from J.N. Tata, right, and it spans right from, let us say, the second half of the 19th century, and now we are into the 21st century. So that's why it's beautiful, because it illustrates the strategy. Because it's such a long period, you can see the distinct phases through which one single house, with a number of constituent companies have moved. What is the first phase? First phase you can call the visionary or the pioneering phase, isn't it? Imagine the situation when J.N. Tata joined his father in business. He started by trading. Now we were a vassal nation, not independent. We had no industry to speak of, and the policy of the rulers was that they will take the natural resources from the country, manufacture it by adding value in their own country, and sell it back into this vast market. That was the policy. Now, in such an environment, it was but natural, that people would strive for A, freedom, and B, once you are free, all right, then you will try and make the young fledgling nation into strong and vibrant country. So in that kind of phase, if you look at it from the business point of view, what was important? Competition was not important. Was the driving force? The driving force was bringing in industry in the first place. And it's natural, I think, that you brought in industry which helps the nation. That is the core industries, infrastructure. So these are the things which drove it. You see, there are a number of firsts which J.N. Tata and the House of Tata has gotten at that time. First cement plant, all right, steel plant, what else? First airlines, insurance company. So within this mad sort of diverse, unrelated thing, there was a thread linking it. These were the various areas, both service as well as core industry, which makes a nation strong, right? Banking, insurance, these are service. Airlines is transportation. Steel, it is very basic. Cement, it is very basic. So there was some method in the apparent madness, driven by the culture and ethos of the time, that phase, the visionary phase or the pioneering phase. Then you come to the second phase. And what is that second phase? I call it the regulatory phase. It started with great promise for the businessman. The Bombay plan was submitted, all right, but that came a cropper. Why? Because the political dispensation led by the then Prime Minister, they favored the socialistic pattern where large chunks of the infrastructure, right, was reserved for the public sector. And the industrial policy resolution said that the public sector will gain the commanding heights of the economy. So what was left over for the private sector was the non-infrastructure, and that was at direct variance with the declared philosophy of the House of Tatas, right? They were kind of left out in the cold, and that was the greatest challenge, how to realign your strategy and still grow when the basic underpinnings of your strategy have been swept aside by a government resolution. So how did they weather that storm and come out of it? They had to evolve another strategy. And this went on for some time till you had the liberalized era coming in, and that brought with it a great force, and that was what? Competition. Competition. And how did they try to change their strategy in meeting this competition? And I think this is very aptly summed up at the end, you know, when Ratan Tata says the Tatas have been a club for a generation. And incidentally, all the prestigious clubs of Western India, all right, the oldest members and all the committees are predominantly Parsis. So literally, they have been a club generation. It is very difficult to break into the committees of prestigious clubs. They are Parsi dominated. As a result, we have become staid, solid and conservative. So at one time, let us say in the pioneering era, when that was a strength, you know, because that got the people came forward, you know, when he wanted to float a company with only 11% steel company, he could raise money from the market. That image helped. Now in the competitive era, it was something which had become a threat. For many years, our risk-taking ability was stinted, and we confined ourselves to marginal diversifications and expansions of facilities. Well, partly that reason may have been the defensive mode in which they went into. They did not want to risk capital into big ventures when they were under threat and attack. So, they wanted to protect their existing businesses. One way to do it is through balancing, all right, minor diversification to build the inherent strength of your existing business and keep it alive. Rarely did we go for new and emerging technologies, because that was full of risk. New emerging is what? Area of uncertainty. So, it is high risk. Now, we have to take bolder steps. So, this is a new competitive era and he is charting the course, strategy is changing. We do have capable young people to carry out ambitious plans. We have to keep them excited, mobile, lean and hungry. Okay. So, the strength of Tatas has been also the culture, the human resource. It is recognized that this is also carry us through into the next generation in the business. Besides, the lieutenants of yesterday have carved out their own domains. You are welcome if you enter these domains by ringing a bell, but you dare you penetrate the boundaries unasked. Hopefully, the group will again fold back together as the next generation takes charge. This is an allusion to the chieftains and the satraps which had come, and which he won the battle. One by one, he tackled each one of them, all right. And except for the head of the hotels, all the rest was done more or less gracefully, I would say. So, this is a case which covers 3 eras of business, all right, and shows how the strategy has to change and align itself with the changes in the regulatory environment. Okay. And that is what all strategic management is about, all right. In order to change strategy successfully, you know, you have to be strong on implementation, and the implementation is made up of the design which you do, okay, to suit the changing strategy. The common design here has been culture, is solidly built on culture and shared values, okay, with other things thrown in between. Any questions? Yes?
I'd just like to make a point. This is from a book, the history of Tata, because some
number of chapters. It has drawn from a number of.
No, I had some book. I read the book.
Okay.
So some references made that J.N. Tata had no dreams about steel, but it's actually written in that book. He himself went with geologists in search of mines, iron ore mines, and he had all these plans already made. And when it was set up, he just left. He passed on. So
he died early at the age of 65 or something.
Yes, he had worked through all this. He had gone with geologists.
But does it say anywhere that he had no?
No, here he doesn't say, but
Yeah.
I think it was just made a reference that
Yeah, yeah,
he
that's
didn't have the
not
big-
factually correct.
Yes,
Yeah,
was going outside the case.
yes, yes.
And second point, I think they've given a lot of credit to the group of Tatas in terms of the charity. But one question comes to my mind: if charity and the development of the country was at the core of the heart, then why did they go to defensive mode when somebody else is doing that work? The public sector was doing infrastructure development. Why did they go to defensive mode?
Because their own house business was under threat.
So it was
That is survival.
So I would say that it is not always the image building is a strategy by itself, but the motivation is business for everyone at every stage of.
Oh yes, I mean that's very true. That's very true.
But,
Because these are charities which have grown out of a business house. I mean that point is not to be disputed. You could always float a charity. You know, I could float a charity. I'm not a businessman. Then it's just for the sake of charity. But if a business comes out with charitable works, okay, the business has to be sound. It has to generate money in order to be able to support it. It's inextricably tied up, you know. So basic motivation is not charity. I think everyone is clear on that, right? Basic motivation, the group 1 in fact drove home this point. He says, in fact, basically, you see, he doesn't believe that there should be any charity at all. It basically should be all business.
So no, even in the, I think the second present when he said there were more of charity, when he was the Jain Tata was in charity. Then he said no, it's business, and then many of the students disagreed.
I think the moot point here is in the era we are talking about, there was very little competition. If you set up, if you had a good entrepreneurial spark, you set up a business and you ran it wisely and well, the profits would come. Profits would come. Then if you had a culture of saying we must help the community also as a good citizen, which Jain Tata had, then to maintain his profits and maintain the charity were not contradictory in terms. As things get more and more competitive, more and more attention has to be given to the golden goose or the goose that lays the golden egg. Your business is what you have to concentrate on.
So charity was more of a strategy. Because that
Charity was,
that was suitable for that time period. To align yourself.
I would not quite agree with that. It was not a strategy for the business. It was subordinate to the business. The basic thing was business, because as I said, you can just set up charities without being in business. There are small, you hear of the big charitable doings, but there are thousands and thousands of charities in India which are just small charities which have been set up by not so rich people.
Even the case kind of tries to give that image that it was a very charitable organization. It's an interpretation, of course, which I think is more of a strategy.
The
Being
case
charitable.
doesn't give the image, it gives a kind of heritage. It's more the philosophy of the founder. Philosophy. I don't think it's a business strategy. It is a core philosophy. Okay, business strategy was more infrastructure.
For example, when Microsoft is donating money for education, $5 billion, Bill Gates started giving this money when he was reduced by public.
Right.
That he's becoming too big and very rich and
Right.
manipulating the market. Then he started this fund for scholarships for students for education purposes. So in that situation,
But it is not comparable to Tata's,
Yeah,
because
it's not
Tata's was proactive. Even in labor legislation, they were the first to bring it out in the world. The legislation, labor legislation, the benefits given to Tata Steel employees, etc. They are pioneers in the whole world. No one had done it. It was not as if because they were rebuked, there was a threat from the community. It was not because of that. Bill Gates, what you said is true. He is trying to make amends. People are saying that he has been a predator, all right. He has been a monolith, absolute monopoly. He is overpricing his products, charging too much. But that's not so in the case of Tatas.
I don't think nowadays I don't think it's anymore a strategy. I think it is more become more of a necessity. Because if you look at any company, even in India, that has been set up after 1980, there is no company in India which doesn't do run a school or run a hospital. It's become almost necessary because everybody does it. So to improve your standing in the community, you also have to do it, whether you like it or not. Everybody does the same.
Okay, here's the point. He says you have to keep up with the Joneses. You have the industrialist club, and you meet on the club. And he says, I say, what have you done lately? I've just set up a school there. Someone says, I set up a hospital. That's an interesting point, yes?
So all of us have been saying that Tata's, the main one of the complete advantage has been the brand, that Tata brand, the integrated brand
equity or image
charitable.
or whatever.
So taking the same point forward as Amal mentioned, I think it was probably a strategic decision to have that and create probably that it could have been invest in brand. So
Strategic decision for? I missed that point.
in such a all of us now agree that they have a very they are known as a very charitable organization and very the brand image is such. So the same taking the same point, I think it was probably a strategic decision to help create that brand. And
But then it doesn't tie in with these reflections that they became staid. J.R.D. Tata himself said that we don't do it in Tatas, that is, we don't sack people. Now, if it were a product of a strategy, it wouldn't be allowed to interfere with the very business, right? But it was interfering. So, the argument then is that it was not part of a business strategy, it came out of a philosophy.
Moreover, sir,
All right.
would a company give 85% of the holdings to charities? Say 20-30% seems more reasonable than giving it to
Sir, I see
more than
it
80%
So,
to charities.
Sir, I see it more ironical because even
Huh.
when we talk about J.R.D. Tata saying that I want to now retire. Now look at the age at which he actually retires. That is around more than 86 or 87. Now if that is the age when you finally take a decision that situation itself is ironic that at age of 86, 87.
Yes, that's another point of view. We are running out of time. Yes. We have not said a word today. You've been a very good listener. So let's hear the last one.
They are making a lot of money as charity. At that time, there was not much competition.
Yeah.
So this money, they can always reflect in the product price after this one. So it is not actually a charity. It looks like a charity. It's not actually a charity.
Okay, here's another point of view. But then one way to research this is to see that in the liberalized competitive era, how much of their money they are still giving to the charity.
What we listened is the Bhushan Rana that they had a lot of people. They gave employment to people. But many of these sectors like Cisco and all this, the product was controlled. That is, they were subsidized by the government, like fertilizer today.
Yeah.
So the cost of production does not affect.
I got your point.
But after 9/11, they kicked out a lot of people.
I understand. So you recovered everything in any case. So it wasn't charity. Huh? But would you like to give some money to charity yourself as an individual taxpayer?
So it's very difficult.
You get waiver under section 80G, remember? See, there's always some motive. Alright, you have to see whether it's a primary or a subsidiary. Yes. Huh? By the way, I would encourage all of you when you get those big pay packets, to give something every year to some charity. You will get a tax waiver also. But it's something you should do because we are very fortunate part of our 1 billion community. Are we not? So if we give away 10-15,000 out of our pay packet of 3 or 4 lakhs, it is not going to hurt us. It will benefit. And there are many schemes. You can adopt a child, pay 2,000, 3,000 rupees, all right, for the education. So many worthwhile NGOs are there. So this is my recommendation to you, do that. I think it's a duty for all of us. We are privileged people in our country. Okay, so this is my last class. You have any other class from Professor Dey? You have. All right, best of luck in the exams.